Hotel staff of Reddit, what is the creepiest, weirdest, most unexplained event that you've experienced on the job? I used to work the overnight shift at a hotel with rooms ranging from very cheap to moderately expensive. The hotel was located just off the highway, and was designed to be a convenient accommodation point for people traveling through the city, and who didn't want to make their way into the busier parts of the city. Because of that, it wasn't out of the ordinary when a guy who looked as though he hadn't slept in a while came in and booked into a room for the night. He didn't want breakfast delivered, or a map of the city. He didn't seem to have any spare clothes. He did want to make sure that the rooms were made up every day, even though he was only staying the night. In hindsight, all of those things were somewhat significant, as an indicator for what he was thinking at the time, and what happened next. The night was quiet. I didn't scout the hotel through the night, and I made no effort to contact the guests unless they called me for some reason. Nothing felt off. The next morning, when the head housekeeper arrived, we prepared for her to start making up rooms while the guests leaving that day checked out. We had a 10 a.m. checkout time, but we were happy to be flexible with the time if we were given some notice. The guy from the night before didn't give any notice, hadn't checked out at 10 a.m., and specifically asked about the housekeeping services. Because of that, me and the head housekeeper decided to knock on his door to check on him. No answer. I used my master key to let us into the room, and announced that we were at the door. No response. We walked in to see the man in bed. He was curled up with the blankets up to his ears. Just laying there. I knew immediately what had happened. The head housekeeper didn't cotton on immediately. She walked up to him, put her hand on his shoulder, and shook him, trying to wake him. After only a moment, it clicked in her head what was going on, and she squealed and ran back towards me. The man had died through the night. He had advanced cancer, and had no family who would find him if he had died at home. We don't know why he wasn't in hospital, but given that he still had hair, he must have refused treatment, or treatment was not an option for him. He wanted to make sure that when he died, someone would find him, and so he chose to die in bed at a cheap highway hotel. It was creepy, but it was also really sad. No one should be that alone in life. My coworker was an adorable little old Asian man who was very hard to understand. He was the housekeeper on weekends, so I would work with him most of the time. He was the weirdest thing at the hotel, but I'm sure it was a cultural thing for him. What I could understand from him and from stories from coworkers is that he very much believed in spirits. He claimed to have banished an evil spirit from the kitchen. And he also claimed that the third floor was haunted by a woman. The weirdest thing he did was, one day in the winter, he brought a freaking pigeon into the hotel. It was snowing outside and the hotel was moderately busy that night. But he kept this pigeon with him the entire time, and the damn thing never wanted to fly away, would just walk around with him or stay on his cleaning cart. The reason he kept it close is because he said it was a woman in its past life and she was cold and lonely. So he took it in and cared for her/it. It lasted that weekend, and I think our general manager made him get rid of it or stop bringing it into the hotel. According to my coworkers, he brought it home. I used to work in a small 20-room hotel built from an old mansion. So yeah, super creepy from the right perspective. I've heard old ghost stories, but never saw anything supernatural. Rather, the creepy stuff came from guests. One time, a lovely couple checked in. Although the guy was way older than the woman, they were friendly and enthusiastic. Later that night, about midnight, keep in mind that at that time, I am the hotel's only employee on staff, my switchboard tells me that their room had dialed 911. Since the guy was old, I was afraid he had a heart attack or something. I go to their room, and knock on the door. It takes a while, but the door opens a bit. It is pitch black in their room. Like, they closed the curtains, and turned on no lights. I can't see the guy at all, but I hear the man's voice, and it's a cackled whisper out of a horror movie. Yes? Me, excuse me sir, is everything okay? I saw that you dialed 911. Him, who are you? Me, I'm new bosses, the guy who checked you in. You dialed 911, is everything okay? Him, we don't, giggles creepily, have a phone. Me, yes you do, and you called 911 from it, is everything okay? Him, oh, we have, giggles, meant to call 411, giggles, sui. He closes the door. I go back to my desk fearing something insane is going on. The next day, the two of them come downstairs, super happy, acting completely normal again. Shit was just weird. Now I'm pretty sure I have an explanation for the guy's behavior. Drugs. But damn if that wasn't creepy. Ha ha ha, I'm laughing just thinking about it. I'm a setup manager at a hotel for big events. I was double checking all the rooms before I went home for the day, and I went into one of the event rooms and flicked on the lights. I shit you not, there was a grown-ass naked man in the dark. He like flinched when I turned the lights on and it scared me. I sorta yelled, "What are you doing?" Turns out he was swimming and needed a place to change. Instead of just going to his room like a normal person would, he chose a dark event room. Okay, super creepy story time. I work at a mid-tier popular hotel in the south on the 3 to 11 p.m. shift. About a month and a half ago I get a call from an older man working at the Haynes Company, trying to check on a reservation. Apparently the reservation didn't pop up in our system, so he then starts asking me if it's okay if guests who stay at the hotel can get packages shipped to them during their stay. Sure, whatever, we will sign for them too. He then slides in a worst case scenario, you guys will end up with 300 pairs of stockings. That was it. Or so I thought. Proceed to 2 weeks ago around 9 p.m., the phone rings and it's the Haynes man again. But this time he sounds a little off. Super soft voice with almost shallow breathing. He's checking on the reservation again, which still isn't there. As I try to offer to make the reservation, he cuts me off to tell me that the package of stockings will be coming in. And then even more shallow breathing, in the creepiest softest voice asks, "Do you wear thigh highs?" I still can't shake the tone of voice. I hung up so quick and locked the doors. Oh man. So back in the mid-80s I was stationed in Hawaii. I needed some extra cash, so I picked up a gig working security at a hotel. This particular hotel had a smaller hotel next to it that was owned by one of the major airlines. We basically provided check-in and check-out services for them, but I never really did much for them in terms of security other than chase off the occasional drunk guy trying to follow the flight attendants into the hotel. One night I got a call asking me to come up to one of the higher floors of the hotel to try and quiet things down. These floors were typically where the pilots stayed and had bigger rooms, and usually were the ones without much issue. The elevators opened to 2 buck-naked pilots chasing 5 naked flight attendants around the hall. The entire group were trashed and there were signs that there was probably some coke in one of the rooms. On seeing me, one of the pilots told me to get out of my clothes because they needed more cock if they were going to tame these wild women. I politely declined and told them that they were going to have to keep it down because we were getting complaints. The pilot saluted, herded the women into his room and closed the door. Not sure what happened, but there weren't any more noise complaints. The weird part was for the next 3 months I had the job, I would routinely see the pilots and the flight attendants in question. All acted as if nothing happened, and I never had another complaint. I've worked as a front desk employee for over a year now. Story time. On a slower night I was working the front desk by myself, and we didn't have any housekeeping/houseman working that night, so I was completely alone aside from the guests in the hotel. I'm a 5'5" plus 120-pound girl, by the way, this will matter in a minute. A big burly dude walks in and I can tell immediately that he has some form of mental handicap. I ask him if there's anything I can help him with and he says I need to call the cops, now. I'm like, oh shit, duck, play it cool. I ask him if it's an emergency and he says he just needs the cops here. He's ran away from home. Thus far he hadn't seemed threatening, so I do call the police, but I call the non-emergency number. They usually respond pretty quickly. He puts his hand out like he would like to speak to the operator, so I hand him the phone. I couldn't hear the operator, but I assumed she asked him what the problem was. He proceeds to answer with, I ran away from home and I'm suicidal. And very homicidal. I'm of course like, WTF, but I'm trying to keep the situation calm. I give the operator the address and the dude waits in the lobby staring at me until I secretly call our security company to send someone out, who then escorts him off property. Cops showed up about 30 minutes later and never bothered to find the guy. 10/10 thought I was going to have to fight off a handicapped dude, and I was pretty upset the cops didn't take it more seriously and try to find him. TLDR, big handicapped dude told me to call the cops because he ran away from home and was suicidal and homicidal. Proceeded to stare at me until I called security to take him off property. Fun times. I've had several weird and scary moments happen while working in a hotel in DC. From suicides in luxury suites to terrorist claims, working in the hospitality industry will definitely have you talking about something. One of the most scariest things I've witnessed firsthand is having the fireplace in our lobby explode almost right in front of my face. It all started in the morning when the lobby began to smell a little bit like gas. Usually it's never a problem because the restaurant is next to the front lobby. But after several complaints we decided to look for the source. turns out the fireplace was causing the smell. It was gas starting fireplace. One of the new guys tried to adjust the temperature on it, and instead the fireplace reacted unexpectedly and started a 3-foot flame. One of the bartenders tried to blow it out with the fire extinguisher, but turns out it was not the correct one to use, and it caused the fireplace to explode and create an even bigger flame. All I remember is falling to the ground because of the explosion, and the sprinklers went off. The entire front lobby and restaurant were flooded. I thought I was going to be able to leave work, and they still made me stay my whole shift. Lesson learned from this incident: not all fire extinguishers are used for the same purpose. There's like 4 different kinds to stop a specific fire. Now the creepiest request I ever got was from to find an escort for a gentleman and giving a room to a porn star. DC hotels for you! ! We once had a double-leg amputee guest who was also an alcoholic. He got around in a motorized wheelchair, and his caretaker/nurse came with him for this trip. One night, he was down in the lobby, drunk, and his caretaker had clearly had enough of him for the day. He was cruising around the lobby in his wheelchair, taking turns way too fast. It was raining at night, so the tile floors were a little slick, and yes, the signs were up. Anytime he would zoom by his caretaker, she would half-heartedly tell him to stop, but he didn't care. The front desk staff kept asking him to slow down, but he would just flip them off, mumble something, and go faster. This particular hotel had a very steep ramp in the front next to the stairs. The ramp was not for wheelchairs, it was only to help people bring luggage in / out, and the sign next to the ramp clearly stated that. In his drunken agitated stupor, he didn't read the sign and went flying down the ramp. He toppled out of the wheelchair and tumbled down the ramp, ass over tea kettle, like an egg. As soon as he hit the ground, he started yelling about suing the hotel and how he was going to take all their money. The poor security guard working had to pick the guy up to put him back in his wheelchair, while he was still screaming. Then the security guard just slinked away as fast as possible. I still laugh anytime I think about that one. Another time we got a call at the front desk from a guest saying the person in the next room was screaming. A couple people went up to check it out, and somehow a morbidly obese man, at least 400 pounds, had gotten himself stuck when he was in the shower. I don't know what he was going for, but he got himself wedged in between the shower and toilet, kind of half sticking out of the shower. He was completely stuck, and saying that his knee was going to give out any second. The fire department had to come and cut him out. But it was that same poor security guard that was tasked with holding up a fat, dripping wet, naked man until the fire department got there. If anyone at that hotel deserved a raise, it was that security guard. He's seen some shit. My dad used to work in a hotel. A few years ago, he hears a scream from a maid as she's cleaning one of the rooms. He runs in, and there's a giant python just chilling in the bathtub. This thing is apparently like 4 feet long. They tried to track down a couple who had just checked out of the room, but the number they'd given the front desk wasn't working. Eventually animal control showed up and took the snake. That poor maid was terrified to clean the bathrooms for a while. Edit: some have pointed out that using the word giant to describe a 4-foot-long snake is a bit of a hyperbole. Maybe so, but 4 feet of python is definitely a huge shock when you're not expecting it. It's not under the same category, but I've worked in hotel for almost 13 years and have an interesting story. My coworker is a bellman at a hotel, and one night he was assisting a young couple / guests with their luggage, or so we thought. He assisted the guests with 2 full carts of, mostly random, odd-looking stuff, and few luggage. The gentleman seemed to be normal, but his girlfriend was on drugs, not the pharmaceutical kind either. So, my coworker spent over 40 minutes unloading their stuff from the car, then to their room. Now he had a bunch of boxes with random things. Long black cases looked like rifle cases, and bullet cases, and weird-looking machines that couldn't be identified. After chatting with him, a lot of his stories didn't add up at all and sounded very shady. After my coworker finished assisting him, he did not give my coworker any gratuity for assisting with all of his stuff. After being annoyed for all the services he did for our guests, feeling uneasy about him being really shady as well, my coworker ended up just looking up his name online. We found out the guest had a warrant for arrest in another state. His warrant was for drug possession / dealing, indecent exposure, and gun possessions. Also, on the warrant said he is armed and dangerous. So my coworker went to management / security, and they decided to call our local police department. They looked up his info, and the police department came in with full arsenal and arrested him. He had massive amount of drugs with intent to distribute and weapon possessions. The guest was arrested and taken back to the state and put in jail. Moral of the story is, Always tip your bellman, especially if you're doing shady/illegal activities in the hotel. Going on 20 years ago, I worked at a Holiday Inn. There were always a number of people that actually lived there, paying for rooms by the month. You'd see them at the bar. Hell, one guy was so trusted we gave him keys to the kitchen. He'd go in there late at night and make the front desk sandwiches. One of these dudes was walking around one night with a paper lunch sack full of $100 bills. He was going up to everybody he could, at the bar, in the lobby, and gave out his hundos. People actually complained about it because it freaked them out a bit. Not me, I took 100. The next morning he was found dead in his room by the cleaning crew. Suicide. Not a hotel, but I worked maintenance for a vacation cabin rental company. One night, I get a call from a guest that she has mice in her cabin, so I grab some traps and bait and head up. She was there by herself, little strange, but I made some small talk as I set up the traps. She said her husband worked a couple states away and was supposed to meet her there later that night. The next morning they were due to check out at 11, noon comes and they're still in, so the front desk tries calling. No answer. 12:30 comes and housekeeping needs to get in to clean as it was a turnover, so front desk tells them to knock and go in case the guest is asleep or something. She had attempted suicide by overdosing on pills when her husband never showed. She was unconscious but still had a pulse, so she left by ambulance. I think she ended up living. Thinking back afterwards, I remembered thinking it was a little odd how many prescription pill bottles she had in plain sight the night I was in there. We also have one lodge that sleeps 24 people that's really creepy when you're alone. I've had multiple people, some who have never worked or stayed there, tell me matter-of-factly that a man hung himself in the upstairs bedroom. I'm not sure. But I hate being there by myself. I've heard footsteps on multiple occasions, had doors shut or open themselves while I was in there with no draft, seen shadows out of the corner of my eye, etc. My uncle used to work at a crappy motel in upstate NY. There was always some shady clientele coming through but nothing to write home about. One day a customer complained about his room smelling, so my uncle took note and carried on with his work. The next day another customer complained about a smell in their room. It was the same room. My uncle gave in and went to find the source. He walked in and immediately smelled it. An animal must have gotten into the wall and died because it was awful. It smelled like it was coming from behind the bed, so he tried to move it but couldn't. He removed the mattress to make it easier. The bed was a solid oak frame that went down to the floor and a mattress that sat on top of it. Underneath the mattress inside the square oaken frame was a dead body. They later found out it was a mob killing and they stashed it there a week or so ago, and it began to smell and permeate the mattress and oak frame. He didn't work there much longer after that. Edit. I called my dad to confirm and he said my uncle actually was working in Long Island and this was the 80s, so it matches with the Mineola story some of y'all have found. Creepy AF. Also similar to the Iceman killer stories but not the same location, I don't think. I'm a housekeeper. I've walked in on a few people having sex or being naked, but they are usually pretty embarrassed. But this one time when I had just started, I knocked on the door to clean this guy's room. He opened it just a peek so he could see who was at the door. I thought, he must be in a towel or something, he's gonna tell me to come back later or go away. Well, he did, once he saw it was me. But not before flinging the door open the rest of the way, revealing he was butt-ass naked. And that's how I learned what ginger pubes look like. Still don't know what was running through the dude's mind, but he didn't have a boner, so I'm gonna rule that out. Sounds like coworkers ducking with you. I worked at a hotel that was owned by a college. The rooms inside the courtyard were rented out to customers, but the outer rooms were meant for long-term stays and college kids. There was an old man that lived in the very front of the hotel, had for decades. He was a germaphobe and was terrified of spiders. He would come down at night and talk to me. For some reason I was super interested in everything he had to say. Mostly cause it was boring and slow at night, but he knew a lot of history about the city we live in. One night he came down to the lobby and was in tears. I asked him what was wrong and he told me that there was a spider in his room. Could I get rid of it for him? Normally, the only people allowed in his room were the housekeepers when they changed his sheets, so I had no idea what I was in store for. I opened the door to see that every inch of his room was covered in old newspapers. He had plastered them on the walls, the tables, the sinks, chairs. Everywhere. There were stacks and stacks of newspapers everywhere. I found the spider at the bathroom and killed it. Just as I was about to flush, he was like, no. I asked him what is wrong? He didn't want me to flush it because it might crawl back in. So I took this mushed spider in a tissue and out the room. He was a sweet old man, but it just really creeped me out seeing his room covered in newspapers. We have this guy who always has hookers. Not been surprising since we are a brand that promotes a party lifestyle. But recently the dude came down and asked me to give him a different room, was super vague about his reasoning. The room wasn't cleaned well enough. So whatever, I do it, and about 30 minutes later we get a call down from the original room, which in our system comes up as vacant, from a woman attempting to order room service. Red flag. So essentially this scumbag banged one lady, switched rooms, got a new hooker and left the first one in the original room. My supervisor had to interrupt his back-to-back session for some explanation, and he just hit his tail between his legs, lol. Guy comes in with a work crew to stay with us for a couple weeks. A dozen guys total, and all of them were cool except this one. Each guy was to get his own room, which required me to see their ID so I could enter them into the computer. The conversation went something like this. Me: okay, I need to see your driver's license. Guy: no, you don't need to see my license. Me: pause sir, I need to verify who you are so I know you belong in the room I am to give you. For that, I need to see a government-issued ID. Guy: these guys will vouch for me. Me: these guys aren't paying for the room. The people who are paying for the room have asked me to verify everyone. I need to see your ID, sir. Guy hands me an obviously old college ID card. Me: sir, I need to see a government-issued ID. I hand his college ID back to him. Guy: so then, if I don't have it on me, what would you do? Me: I'd have to call the company and verify your employment status with them. I would also have to explain the call by stating your refusal to provide ID to me directly. Guy finally hands over his driver's license. So, if someone doesn't have a driver's license, what do you do? Me: we can also accept state ID cards, concealed carry cards, and passports as valid ID. Guy: and if they don't have any of that? Me done entering him into the computer and handing his DL back to him, then they either need to be staying with someone who does have valid ID, or they need to find another place to stay for the night. He wasn't aggressive or loud, just really hesitant to just hand over the DL and let me get on with my job. Also, his co-workers were injuring themselves rolling their eyes behind him. One of them thanked me for how I handled the whole thing and apologized for his behavior. I worked as an interim night auditor. The first night on the job, a man calls to the desk and asks for bath towels. I felt weird about the way he had asked, so I asked security to come up with me. Sure enough, the man has no pants on. People, when you go to a hotel and there are girls working the front desk, it's not usually the case that the girls are just going to your room to bring towels. And they're not going to respond to your sexual advances. Seriously, people. Put your ducking dick away. Was working as a bartender at a hotel bar this summer. One night while I was playing Flappy Birds, there was no one at the bar. I saw 3 people coming downstairs. I hide my phone and look at them. One of them had a dildo duct taped on his forehead dressed as a ducking rouster. The other guy was wearing a KKK cloak with a whip in his hand singing the Uptown Funk song, and the third guy dressed as a maid, a guy with a female maid costume. They just pass around the bar making a circle around the bar twice. It was a round bar, then coming behind the bar. The rouster asked if I could make a blowjob for them. While I was taking out the shot glasses they stopped me and said, "No, I mean a real blowjob," to which I was confused and told them I'm not into guys. They laughed and said, "We know, but we want to make train sex and we need a fourth." I got confused for the first few seconds, then my imagination kicked in. Not knowing how to react, I told them that my shift was ending in 15 minutes and they could ask the next bartender if he wanted to. A few seconds later, in some awkward eye contact, they went outside near the pool to wait for the bartender. I went to the bathroom just to avoid them, and when I came back they were gone. TLDR, I was going to go on a train trip invited by a cock. I'm probably late to this, but whatever. I have 2 stories from when I said to work at the Queen Mary. I had always heard about it being haunted, but I was always a skeptic about anything paranormal. I'd usually work the 3rd shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Our job usually consisted of tearing down for parties that were held at night and setting up for breakfast caterings in the morning. So there was a lot of downtime in between those events. For the most part, we'd hang out in our warehouse/storage room. The warehouse was located to one of the old pools that were drained. One night me and my coworkers were just chilling there waiting for a party to end, when we started hear the sounds of kids laughing. It was one of those eerie echo laughs that just sent chills down all of our spines, but then we also started hearing splashing sounds. A look of terror fell across all of our faces. Eventually we all got the courage to look outside, and when we got to the pool you could see wet footprints that lead from the pool to the door of our warehouse. We all just noped the duck out of there. This second incident wasn't as scary. On another night we had to clean up after a party around 2 a.m. While cleaning up, one of my coworkers told me to look up and check out this hot girl. Up on the upper deck of the boat you could see this beautiful woman in a red cocktail looking down at us. Being the teenager that I was, my coworker and I decided to try and get a closer look. We climbed up the stairs to the upper deck in order to get a better look, but in the time it took to climb up the stairs she had disappeared. Never really believed in ghosts, but after working there for about a month I truly became a believer in the paranormal. I worked the front desk, and this elderly Asian man repeatedly came and asked for the small lotion containers. I didn't think anything of it, but one morning he came down and seemed really upset. He yelled, halfway in his own language, saying that the staff was not supplying him with enough lotion. I asked housekeeping if they'd put some extra ones in his room to keep him happy. However, the next morning he came again to complain. I finally got an empty shoebox-sized tub and filled it with the at least 50 lotion bottles. I've never seen a man so content with a box full of lotion. Not technically a hotel, but my mom used to be a manager at this huge old mansion that was used primarily for weddings, but had rooms available if the parties were traveling in from out of town. According to her and the rest of the staff, this place was definitely haunted. Several stories validating these claims stick out in my memory, something about a chef killing himself in one of the rooms, or original homeowner's daughter dying in another room, etc. I mean, though this place was very beautiful and elegant, it was huge and several hundred years old, so you can imagine that some of these stories weren't very hard to believe, especially since my mom always was working there late, sometimes alone, and consistently had creepy stories. The one that sticks out in my mind the most is relatively tame but absolutely chilling. So one night after one of the weddings, my mom and some of the other staff are cleaning up. They did the normal stuff, clear the tables and tablecloths, break down all the equipment, collect the decorations and box them for the client, then place all the chairs upside down on top of the tables so that the next day they could vacuum or mop. The wait/cleaning staff leave around midnight, but being the manager, my mom has to stick around and close up shop. So as she is making her way to the back office on the ground floor, she passes the dining room, and sees that the chairs are still placed on the floor around the tables, despite the fact she almost certainly can remember them placing them on top of the tables an hour prior. So she goes around the entire dining room, places them back up on the tables, then proceeds to continue what she was doing before. About an hour later at around 2 a.m., she's getting ready to leave, going room to turn the lights off. The last room she has to turn the lights off for is the dining room, so she goes in, gets ready to turn off the lights, and what does she see? The ducking chairs back on the floor around the tables. The way she tells the story, it was at this point she froze in a mix of terror/confusion, and just noped the duck out of there. My friend and I landed jobs in the same hotel. We both worked the night shifts on weekends. And we were the only employees there. He was reception. I was the bellboy security gopher. We were bored one night, so I dragged the helium tank, for balloons I guess. Maybe for weddings? From storage and into the admin offices behind the front desk. And we proceeded to answer telephone calls with high-pitched voices all night long. Not sure if it's creepy, but I'm sure it was weird for the callers. I'll add a category to the title, Saddest Experience Working at a Hotel. I worked the front desk at a Best Western in Pennsylvania. My shift started at 7 a.m. when I relieved the clerk that works the overnight shift. 2 police officers walked into the lobby a few hours into my shift and asked if I was the clerk that checked in a certain guest. I looked in our system and saw the overnight clerk checked in a couple, men and women in their 30s, at about midnight. They explained to me the woman that paid for the hotel room is in trouble for stealing a credit card from a woman in New Jersey and making unauthorized purchases, which led them to the hotel once the overnight clerk ran the credit card authorization at 3 a.m. that morning. When I got to work that day, we have a ledger that showed you which rooms were rented/available and the names of guests. I had no interaction with the woman being tracked down by police. Because they didn't have a warrant, I couldn't just let them into her room. But I sent a cleaning lady to her room to see if she was inside, and we'd take it from there if she was. The room was empty, so the police handed me a photo of the woman and asked me to call them as soon as I see her returning to her room. Not even an hour after they leave, the woman walks through the lobby with the guy she checked in with. I smiled and let them get into the elevator before I called the police. Within minutes, the out-of-town police along with local law enforcement descended upon the hotel and made it up to the hotel room the couple was staying in. When they barged in, they found the woman alone in the room. The guy that was with her moments before was gone. I saw her being led out of the hotel in handcuffs while bawling her eyes out. It turns out the woman they arrested was severely mentally challenged and she thought she was on vacation with her boyfriend when the police made the arrest. The boyfriend was the one who stole the credit card from one of the nurses from her outpatient therapy group she frequented and took her on a tri-state spending spree before he abandoned her in another state. Okay, nobody gonna believe this, but here it goes. Never worked for a hotel, but this involves a hotel. When I was about 12 years old, my dad was starting up a pair of chillers for a newly constructed posh Miami Beach hotel. He would work from 7 p. 7 a. and his job was essentially to monitor the units. Since it was quite boring and things weren't the best at home, I would often go with him and hang out on the beach. Sometimes we would take our chocolate lab. Anyway, so there was a basement level hallway that connected this new hotel to one in the lot next to it, which was much older. The old hotel was actually in the 50s, a nursing home with a bad reputation, i.e. shut down for abuse. It was probably turned into a hotel at least 30 years prior. Whenever we would walk through that side you would get a creepy chill up your spine, but never saw or heard anything crazy. Anyway, one night we had the dog, and were walking through the hallway, dog chillin', when all of a sudden he just stuck his feet in the ground and wouldn't go another step forward. I mean, we couldn't drag this dog forward. He wanted to go back in the other direction so badly, so we eventually took him back. Turns out the spot that he wouldn't cross was pretty much the exact midpoint between the new and old hotel. Worked as one of the room cleaners for about 2 years as a young teenager. Went from cleaning the rooms to managing the cleaning staff. I was the only one who could speak English and was a legal resident of the States. Lots of people answer the doors naked or yell "come on in" while they are naked. Lots of people want you to change their bedding/clean the room, so on so forth, but they want to remain in the room while you do it. It's uncomfortable and it led to some pretty heavy policy changes. Apparently flushing just isn't worth doing for some people out there. A couple bounty hunters were chasing a guy fleeing a bail bond situation and management decided that I, as a 16-year-old, would definitely need to be involved in that shit and help them get into his room. Knocked on the guy's door, yelled that it was housekeeping and keyed in. The works. That too was horribly uncomfortable and a sinking "I hope this guy has something to lose and isn't about to go apeshit on me, working for my minimum wage" kind of way. There was half a rabbit in the parking lot one morning. There was no blood about to indicate that the severing of the rabbit happened in that location. Another Redditor once suggested a bird dropped that half, which is plausible, but the other thought was animal sacrifices, and I wouldn't put it past the clientele. I can't vouch for other hotel chains, but this particular one did not change out the brown blankets and the colorful comforters daily. Monthly was a bit more likely. They didn't have extra ones to replace while the used ones were washed. They only had a few spares to replace damaged or ruined blankets/comforters. So if they were okay, they got sprayed with some disinfectant and put back on top of clean sheets. Management said it was industry standard. I was a teenager so I trusted them, but looking back on it I find it hard to believe. There were fun times though. If any guests left anything behind and didn't return to claim it in like 10 days or so, we pretty typically got to keep it. And I was quite surprised at how many older couples would leave cash tips in their room as appreciation for the cleaning staff. All in all, it was a super weird job. You could only get an hour or two of work if it was a slow day, or you could still be working 7 or 8 hours later if your staff failed to show up and you had a full load. There were some cool days and some nightmare days. And there was also a day where I found a bucket of dildo sand, which was and always will be a great conversation piece. I was working in a big resort in Greece where we had 4 hotels located in the resort. I was working in one of the smallest of the 4 hotels where usually at night there are only 2 people working, myself, the groom, and a receptionist. One night it was ridiculously misty, maybe happens 3 times while I was working there. I was just standing around the driveway, when I see someone approaching from the gate around 4 a.m. Nothing out of the ordinary, but as the person got closer, I noticed it was an old lady in a white nightgown wearing nothing else and walking bare feet. This literally looked like a scene straight out of a horror movie. I kinda froze for a second and thought to myself that I had fallen asleep on shift or someone pulling a prank. But sure enough, this lady comes closer, blank expression on her face, feet completely muddy and scratched up. I slowly walked up to ask her if she is okay, expecting her to jump and choke me to death as she would bite my face off. As she got closer I could see she was really confused and didn't really know where she was. I tried to ask her if she knows which hotel she was staying at and what her name was, but she couldn't remember where she was staying or what her room number was. So we went inside into the reception where my colleague is also doing a double take on this lady and looking at me with a sort of expression like, where the hell did I find this thing? After a few minutes of searching with the names she was giving us and calling the other hotels, we found a family with similar last names she had been giving us. She was really confused and was giving us many names in one of the other properties. So I got the longest golf car we had on the property. Put her in the furthest seat in the back just in case she decides to go all zombie mode and take a nice bite at my neck, and off we went to the hotel with myself constantly looking behind my shoulder like a paranoid 20-year-old every 200 meters. Turn out that the old lady was on holiday with her family and she was suffering from Alzheimer. They think she kinda sleepwalked out of her room and then got lost and confused after that. The mind is a very dangerous and scary thing. Not hotel staff, so sorry, but I have a relevant story. I was staying at a hotel and was walking through the halls at the same time as the cleaning woman was going room to change sheets and such. As I'm walking past her, she's entering a room, and suddenly I hear this kind of surprised yell from her and foot shuffling. My head whips around just in time to see some guy with his dick in his hand before the door was slammed and the cleaning lady moved on. She noticed that I saw what happened, and just shook her head and said something about how she hates when that happens. Not sure how creepy that is, but it sounds like it's not such a rare occurrence at some places. There's probably a few dozen guys with an exhibition fetish that just go from hotel to hotel showing their junk to hotel staff for shits and giggles. Definitely was creepy and weird to me, though I can understand having that fetish. Just seems mean to do that to unsuspecting cleaning staff. Reddit, what is your most disturbing, scary, or creepy real story? Serious. I posted this just a couple days ago on another thread. This isn't very interesting, but I woke up with blood gushing down my cheek when I was younger and I didn't feel anything but my face felt wet, so I went down to my parents' room and they freaked out. Till this day we still have not clue what cut my face, but I needed 8 stitches next to my eye. We checked the sheets, pillowcases, edges of the bed, etc. Still no idea. So I was sleeping, and in the middle of the dream a character of my dream who was doing something turned her head, looked at me very seriously and said, "There's someone in your apartment, wake up." I nearly had a goddamned heart attack, and my apartment was empty. It was you. You were in your apartment all along. I had awesome parents who let me sleep in the living room on weekend nights when I was very young because my sister was a light sleeper and I could stay up until dawn. But of course I always end up sleeping on the couch because Nick at night made me tried. So, one night I wake up to the prickly feeling. Like an instinct. Just bolted into a sitting position and stared out the front window. We lived in rural Georgia, so you can imagine the magnitude of trees. In perfect light cast from the moon, I see a silhouette of someone in the stalking tree. The family dog dashes to the window and is snarling into the glass. Terrified, I run into my parents' room and try to explain to my parents that there is a strange person outside. Dad grabs something defensive and darts outside with the dogs to beat the wax off the hot head. I tremble in Mama's arms until Dad comes home and says he saw no one and to go to bed. I decide to sleep in my regular bedroom. I fill in my sister in as to what happened. Dad is making regular rounds in the house with a cup of coffee. We're all still and I finally think I can sleep. Nope. I notice the man outside my window. From what I can see in the moonlight, he gives me a shush signal and runs away. Just turns around to run a straight line away. I swear I couldn't stop crying for what felt like hours. When I was a young child I had the same dream every night for years about drowning when a huge wave swept over me and I sank to the bottom. Years later I had a temp job delivering mail one summer during college. I saw this old lady sitting on a front porch waiting for me. When I got up there she looked at me and said in a foreign accent, "You drowned when Oceania sank beneath the waves." Freaked me out. My house sits farther back in the lot than most other houses. It is a strange layout as well. The sidewalk runs the length of the living room and ends at the front porch, which lets into the living room. Large windows that do not open allow great light to get into the living room, but at the cost of no privacy. The rest of my family was on vacation, and having the house to myself, I decided I would get smashed. Well, I pass out on the couch in the living room at about 9, when I realized I was too scared to walk back to my room. The couch is right underneath these big windows. I woke up suddenly, not knowing why. I had a severe case of the chills, and I could not figure out why. Then the banging started. It came from right above me. I did not move, but I opened my eyes and looked up at the window. Someone was standing there, pounding on the glass. Without moving, I looked at the cable box. It was around 3 in the morning. The banging continues. Then it stopped suddenly, but I still did not move. Suddenly it commences again, coming from 2 different directions now. Someone is banging on the window, and another person is banging on the front door. They kept doing it, would not go away. Finally, after about 40 minutes they quit. It was the most terrifying event I can recall at the moment. It made me a nervous wreck after that. I called a friend the next day to see if he would come over and stay for the rest of the week, and his response was, "What the duck for? So that we can both be murdered in our sleep? Thanks a lot, asshole." When I was about 10, all of my cousins and siblings were over, about 10 of us there. The parents and grandparents were out for an adult dinner. So it was just the kids sitting around watching a few movies when all of a sudden the house shook and there was a large flash coming from the backyard. It felt as if a bomb dropped. We all heard, felt, and saw it, and as a pack we ran into the hallway. The eldest cousins in the group debated on calling the police but opted to call the parents. After a few minutes we gained our courage and ventured out into the living room again, this time with weapons, just in case. After a half hour with no other issues, the parents came home and thought we were insane. There was nothing wrong with the backyard and no neighbors reported anything. It's been 10 years, and we still talk about it, trying to figure out what it was. That has been the scariest thing to happen to me by far. I once sat across from a guy who told me about killing his girlfriend, him cutting her into pieces and boiling her head. He explained why he killed her and wished he could talk to the parents so they could understand that what he did was a good thing. It wasn't. I sat with him for 45 minutes as he went into detail. Was the most surreal 45 minutes of my life. Source: worked in max security mental health facility. Okay, so this happened to me last summer when I was back at my parents' house during the holidays. It was around 3 a.m. and I was in my room on my computer when I got a call from my sister. Now that was already a little bit weird since my sister's room is just down the hallway from mine and she could have just came in my room. I went to pick up and the call ended as soon as I reached the phone. I figured that she wanted to speak with me, so I got up and went to her room. As soon as I reached her door, she started screaming that someone was in the room with her, so I busted in and of course nobody was here. After she stopped crying, she told me that she woke up and saw a dark shadow just centimeters from her face, and that's when she screamed. So I told her that she called me. She told me that her phone is not in her room and that she was sleeping. Sure enough, her phone is actually downstairs in her purse. The weird part is that I have the log of her call on my phone but she doesn't. Never managed to explain this one. I was delivering a hot tub to this contractor/realtor in this fancy gated community near Branson, Missouri. When I arrived, the construction workers were in charge of telling me where the thing was supposed to go. It was going on the 4th floor balcony, but because of the way the house was built, the 4th floor was ground floor. The other 3 floors were on the side of a hill, but the driveway was even with the first 4th floor entrance, if that makes sense. So, lot of construction going on, but to get the hot tub on the balcony, I had to make a ramp, take it from the drive, down into the yard, up a ramp to the porch, through the living room door, across the living room, out the back patio doors onto the deck. Problem with this was, the deck was unfinished. A huge section of decking was missing. They had literally installed only enough decking so that I could go from the patio doors to the far corner of the deck where the hot tub would sit. There was no railing. The hot tub weighed 900 pounds and it was a 4-story drop if I fell. The construction workers volunteered to help me. We got it out onto the deck, crossed the narrow bridge of installed decking to the corner, and I was about to lay it down. You move these on a dolly while the hot tub is on its edge for clarification. Laying it down isn't that hard. You tilt it, bring it down to your lap, grab the strap securing it to the dolly and lower it to the deck. It's very controlled and I've done it thousands of times. However, this deck wasn't finished, so the contractor wanted to leave it on its edge. It's a lot harder to take it off when it's standing up, because the dolly is under a 900-pound tub. But, I've done it before. I told them that we would have to put blocks under one side of the dolly, tilt the tub and pop the straps to release the dolly so it could be removed from the area. Then you tilt the hot tub back, remove the blocks and then set the hot tub down on the deck. Problem: the deck wasn't wide enough to allow me to do this safely. I popped the strap on the hot tub, put the blocks under, and I tilted the hot tub, but that put me with my feet 4 inches from the edge of the deck with nothing but 4 stories of air behind me. We were able to free the dolly on one side, but not the other. The hot tub had to be leaned over further toward me. I tell everyone to freeze and they do. I didn't want anyone messing with it because I had to shift my feet back 5 inches so my heels were off the deck. I'm freaking out, but it's all going smooth. I have a construction worker on each side of me helping support the tub, 3 construction workers freeing the dolly, and 1 useless worker playing with the strap that is going to secure the tub to the house so that the wind doesn't blow the tub over. We are inches from having the dolly freed when one of the construction workers freeing the dolly gets impatient and kicks the corner of the tub to dislodge it from the dolly. It works for him, but unfortunately for me, I didn't have my feet set yet. I shout that I'm falling. The 2 guys beside me take the weight of the tub, but no one can get to me. My arms are windmilling, I'm bent almost double backwards trying my damnedest to stay on the deck. I can see the boulders down below out of the corner of my eye. I'm falling and there isn't anything I can do about it. I feel myself go. I'm falling. My heels slip out from under me and no one can reach me, but then suddenly, I'm flying forward. Something is under the small of my back and it's slamming me into the bottom of the tub. The dolly is removed and the tub stood up with me hugging it before I find out what saved me. The useless guy playing with the strap had already secured one end to the house. When I fell, the strap was already behind me, hanging off the deck. The construction worker pulled it tight with all his might, arresting my fall. It wasn't there for that purpose, but he saved my life that day. I would have been dead if not for him. I thanked him by sending him and his wife and kid to Breckenridge, Colorado for Christmas. It was actually a vacation I'd saved for and was about to surprise my wife and daughter with, but I felt he deserved it more. Plus, my wife and daughter didn't know anything about it. Yeah. That was one of my most scariest moments ever. TLDR, fell off a 4th floor deck, but construction worker saved me at the last moment, so I rewarded him with a vacation to Breckenridge, Colorado. This is not supernatural creepy, but is one of the more disturbing and surreal experiences of my life. One early morning a few short years ago, I am walking to my bus stop and eating a banana. It is dark, misty, around 5 a.m. and I am internally debating something trivial, like if I want my daily Starbucks before or after the commute. As I approach the dimly lit corner on my street, a tall man in a black mask steps out of the dark alleyway to my left. Sleepy and disoriented, I barely acknowledge him. When he shouts, "Put down your ducking purse," and points his gun to my head, things start to click. The man says, "Put down your bags," and I tell him, okay, I'm putting them down over here." He orders me to walk over to him, toward the alley, and get down on the ducking ground, and I agree. I'm coming. Okay. My heart is beating a million miles a minute and my hands still smell sticky with banana. I know I need to get away. I don't know why, but my mouth won't stop working. Look, see, I'm on the ground. My stuff is over there. Please just take my stuff, but he doesn't like it. Shut the duck up, okay? He gets on top of me and puts the gun to my head. At this point, I should mention the fact that I'm on my way to coach a high school practice and I'm dressed like a dude. Huge baggy pants, hat, jacket. If not for my telltale voice, I'd look like a prepubescent 90s rap star. Anyway, as the guy gets on top of me, gun to my head, he looks at me and pauses. I can't tell you why I know this, but I swear that at this moment, it clicks for him that I'm a woman. He gets off of me, stands up, and points to the dark alley. Come with me. My stomach hurts. I remember that there have been a recent rash of sexual assaults in my neighborhood, during the daytime no less. When the man points down that dirty alleyway, my internal voice speaks the duck up. Says voice number 1, "There was no way in hell you were going to go down there without a fight. But he has a gun, you dipshit," replies voice number 2. "Ducking, follow me." The real voice, his voice, hollers. So I do what I do best, I talk. "I'm coming, I'm following you." I call. And the man makes a crucial mistake, he believes me. I take 1, 2 tiny steps backwards, toward the sidewalk. And he turns his body, and his gun, toward the alley. This is my moment. I take a deep breath, tuck my head down in case he starts shooting, and start sprinting away. I hear a voice screaming in a high-pitched wail before I realize that it's mine. After running 6 or 7 blocks, I head back to my apartment, hoping he's not there to see where I lived. The police check out the alleyway an hour later, but the potential attacker is long gone. The only evidence of the encounter is my banana peel browning in the alleyway and the adrenaline rush that I couldn't shake for days. I would be lying if I said that if that experience doesn't bother me still. But I'm so fortunate to mainly be haunted by the what ifs and not the what ids. A week after gaining my CPR certification, I had to try and perform CPR on a woman dying of a heroin, probably other drugs too, overdose. I was at a thrift store with some friends looking for Halloween costumes, and someone came in saying that someone was passed out in the parking lot. I was in the dressing room, and it just got super quiet, so I came out and told them I was certified and I'd go take a look and that they needed to call 911. I go outside and don't see anyone on the ground. Someone comes out and shouts that the person is in the car that's parked far out by itself. I ran over and honestly freaked the duck out. She was pretty much already dead. Completely blue in the face, slumped against her car window. She had the red druggy rings around her eyes, but those were blue too because she was so oxygen deprived. We opened the door and I'll never forget that when we turned her head to see if she still had a pulse, she had tears running down her face. We pulled her out of the car, put her on the ground, and took her pulse again because the first person to do it wasn't sure. We started CPR and the ambulance arrived about a minute after. They got her strapped up and in and continued CPR. They had another ambulance come and those EMTs got out and there was literally like 6 of them surrounding her. The cop told us they had administered some type of drug that can apparently reverse heroin overdoses if given in time, but she was pretty much dead already. They would do THE necessary stuff until they could get to the hospital and call it, according to him. I also remember when we opened the door there was heroin needles and empty pill bottles all over the floor. She wasn't very old. We also think she had kids. She had some toys and a car seat, plus 2 names tattooed on her. Edit. Wow. Thank you guys so much for the responses and the gold. It was definitely a rough situation, but for being 19 at the time I think I handled it well. My mother told me this not too long ago, but it happened about 10 years ago now. When my cousin was 17-18 years old, she was in a car crash and had died a couple of weeks later in hospital. She was really close to my dad's sister, our aunt, and used to babysit her kids, who were no more older than 4 years old, all the time. Our aunt's house was under construction just before she passed away and it continued on after she passed away. One day my aunt got a phone call while she was at work from one of the construction workers complaining about a teenage girl who keeps showing up at the house and walking around and that she shows up a number of times during the weeks and it has been happening for a couple of weeks. My aunt asks for a description of the girl to see if she knows her from around the neighborhood, and sure enough the description perfectly matches my cousin who died a few weeks before: long brown hair, red baseball cap, denim dungarees and a white jacket. When my aunt got home, she showed them a picture of my cousin and that all agreed that it was the girl they seen walking around the site. This story really freaked me out when I heard it because our family was never one to believe in anything paranormal or have anything of the paranormal sort happen to them before. When I was in high school, I had a really good friend who lived next door to a house that was always up for sale. People would move out in the middle of the night without a word, and it hadn't had the same owner for more than 6 months straight for a couple of years. One night we were really bored and he suggested we go explore the house next door since it had sat empty for a while. We go around back and there's a dog door that he can crawl through, and he unlocks the door and lets me in. The house itself is really unremarkable. It looked like it was built in maybe the 1950s and was a craftsman-style house in an older, nicer part of town. My friend's house was similarly built. The kitchen had a really nice built-in breakfast table set against a picture window. The house's electricity was off but you could see the street light through the window. My friend and I sit down, on the floor, across from this table, and are just hanging out, talking. Why? Who knows? All of a sudden my friend screams and in that instant, my vision goes black. But it wasn't that I just couldn't see, my body was engulfed in this sickly coldness from head to toe. I start screaming and I feel my friend's hand grabbing mine and pulling me in some direction forcefully. My vision slowly comes back and I start to warm up when I realize that we're outside under the street light. It was December and should have been much warmer inside of that house. Finally I look at my friend and he looks scared. I'm real confused and kind of panicked myself and finally ask him what happened. He says that as I was talking, a black thing. This figure that was all black and only had the vague shape of a girl crawled out from under the table and sat on top of me. Apparently I started groping around with my eyes wide open, like I couldn't see, and he was so freaked out he pulled me out of the house. We're still friends and we bring it up every now and then, but the story itself never changes and it still sends chills down my spine. To this day, I've never felt such blackness or coldness in my life. It was palpable, almost sticky. For a couple of days afterward, I couldn't shake this unsettling feeling, and I could never walk past that house again. Ugh. I'm scared to get out of bed now. Every time I stay at my grandma's house, I hear someone walking upstairs. It starts at one side of the room, casually walks to the other and stops. This will happen maybe twice a night. I didn't start hearing it until I was about 14, when my grandparents made me start sleeping in a different room on the first floor because they started sleeping in separate bedrooms. Blah blah blah. Regardless, both of their rooms are also on the first floor. For a little backstory, I have always been afraid of the upstairs at their house. I don't know why, but it's always freaked me out, and I refuse to ever go up there alone. I'm 23 now, still won't go up alone. There's one room specifically, though. It's a long, narrow bedroom. When you open the door, there are closets on your left and right, a bed placed roughly in the middle of the room, and a window on the far side opposite the door. I was told growing up by my grandparents that the sons of the previous owner claimed to see a gorilla come out of the closet at night, dance around the room, and go back into the closet. I thought nothing of this story until I had to start sleeping in the other room. The room located directly below the scary room upstairs. So, we all go to bed. All the lights in the house are off and I'm still awake, lying on the bed. Then I heard it. Thump. 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 Starting at one end of the room upstairs. It got closer to me, passed right above me, and continued to the end of the room, where it stopped. I am wide awake, terrified out of my mind. It was no question to me that I had heard footsteps. I knew that slow, casual pace. I was freaked out and went to my grandpa's room. I told him what I heard. He told me that the house is old and it creaks. But he turned the dining room light on for me, so I felt a little safer. I tried going back to sleep. Then it started again, this time from where it ended the first time, by the window upstairs. It walks over me again and stops when it reached the door. I thought it was over until 5 seconds later when I heard it coming down the stairs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Silence as it reached the landing. Then 6, 7, 8, 9. 10. And silence again as it reached the first floor. I was frozen in shock. Whatever it was on my floor of the house, and sadly unaffected by the dining room light. I was staring at the doorway to my room, the dining room light was shining in, and my vision began to distort. I felt dizzy with fear, so I pulled the blankets over my head and suddenly heard a scratching sound from inside my room. I knew exactly where it was coming from, too, my grandpa's gun case. It was a very obvious sound. Scratching on the wood. Long scratches down the front of the gun case door. I could even hear the door ever so slightly tapping against the frame as each scratch began. I tried to scream and I couldn't. I took a second to take a deep breath and let out a loud scream. In seconds my grandpa had made it to my room and I was relieved. Needless to say, he still didn't believe me. So I did what any normal person would do. I draped a sheet over the side of the bed and slept underneath it. I wrapped myself tight in a comforter, put on headphones, and turned my back to the door. There could be a party of ghosts in my room and I wouldn't even know. The next morning, my grandpa told my grandma about what happened the night before. She said, "Oh, that's silly. You know, your cousin woke me up the last time she stayed here. She came in my room saying I hear footsteps. I slept under the bed for the rest of my week's stay with them. I've stayed there countless times since that happened, and I hear the footsteps every time. I sleep on top of the bed now, but keep my back to the door and sleep with headphones on. I haven't heard it come down the stairs since that first night. But if it does, I don't want to know. And it's because I'm bad at writing and I can't stay in the same tense." When I was about 7, my 2 brothers and I were playing in an area that was used as an unofficial motocross place. We decided to dig a tunnel for some reason. Being the extra smart guys we were. It took a few hours to dig about 6 feet in and 2 feet high. I was right up at the face when suddenly the tunnel collapsed. It was all dirt with no supports. My world went instantly black and hot. By hot I mean furnace hot. I couldn't move a muscle from the weight of the soil completely enclosing me. I started to really panic, as you do. Everything started turning red, which I guess was blood being forced into my head. Every breath was getting harder as the soil constrained me more and more. Even though my hands were near my face, I couldn't move my arms to clear the dirt around my head, and also started breathing in dirt, which made me cough, which made me contract my stomach, and then I couldn't draw breath at all. This isn't what made me panic though. The total darkness turning red with the incredible heat made my young mind think I was going to hell. I don't know how long I was buried for, but it seemed like an eternity. Suddenly I felt something grab one of my feet. My brothers had been frantically digging through the collapse to pull me out and managed to reach me and then pull me out. We never told my parents, I just went home and got hosed down. TLDR, got buried alive and pissed myself. When we first moved into the house I grew up in, I used to hear things calling my name from the opposite end of the house. Like, I would be in my room playing with Legos or something, and I would hear my dad call my name from his room. So I'd go to my parents' bedroom and ask them what they wanted, and they'd always tell me that they never called my name. Being a little kid, I honestly started to think that they were playing a joke on me, because this happened about once every couple of days. Well, one night it happened and I went to ask them what they wanted, like always. But right as I stepped into their room, I heard my mom's voice calling for me from the living room, which is all the way on the other side of the house. It was at that exact point that I knew no one was tricking me, because I was looking at both of my parents sitting in front of me. I kinda kept this to myself until my brother was diagnosed with partial narcolepsy. One of the symptoms of narcolepsy is apparently oral hallucinations, so I thought maybe I had it too. Went and got myself checked, completely fine. So I have no idea what was calling my name all those years, and I still hear it at night whenever I come visit and stay over. Okay, this is 100% true. I'm 23 now and this happened about 10 years ago, so I was probably 13 or 14. Anyway, I used to skate, board, all the time with my friends Tim and Brandon. One day, we got done skating and we decided to go to 7-Eleven to get some food/drinks before we went home. Remember, I was only 13-14, so we weren't driving. We had skated to the 7-Eleven and were planning on skating/walking back home. Anyway, we buy our drinks and we left the store. We walked to the parking lot's exit and prepared to cross the highway. It's not a bus highway, since it's a small town. While we waited for the traffic light to turn red, so that we could cross, I looked behind me at the 7-Eleven gas pumps. I noticed a 40 to 50-year-old man, pumping gas into his white truck. He stared at me and before I knew it, he dropped the gas pump and jumped into his truck. He slammed on the gas and sped straight at my friends and I. He missed us, but he grazed my arm and knocked my skateboard out of my hand. My friend, Brandon, screamed, "WTF? You duckin' dick," as the man peeled out and sped into the parking lot next to 7-Eleven. I swear to God, he drove through a ditch, which was between 7/11's parking lot and the parking lot he was in, and tried to run us over again. This is where it got bad. The three of us started running at full speed, across the highway and toward the local library, which is like 2 to 3 blocks from 7-Eleven. When we were about half a block away, I looked back and saw the maniac speeding toward us, full of rage. Brandon and Tim ran up to the library doors and I ran towards the woods. It was Sunday, so I knew the library was closed and there was a trail in the woods which led to my backyard. Meanwhile, this maniac peeled into the parking lot and hopped out of his truck. I looked behind me, before escaping into the woods, and saw him grab either a shotgun or a crowbar. I was pretty far away at this point, and I was freaking out, so my vision wasn't great, from the bed of his truck. I ran all the way home. When I got to my street, my neighbor, Tim's dad, told me to get in his car because we had to go to the video store, which is where Tim's mom worked. When I got there, I found Tim and Brandon. They ran to the video store after realizing that the library was closed, and 3 cops. A minute later, my mom came in, crying her eyes out because Brandon and Tim told her they didn't know if I lived or not. Everyone had thought that I was captured. Tim told me that he saw the guy running after me, into the woods, which is scary because I thought the maniac was chasing them, not me. Anyway, he was never caught, and I spent the next 5 years worrying about every white truck I saw. Edit: I forgot the most scary part. My town is small, but it's not empty. There were plenty of people around, while this was going on. I felt so helpless, running for my life, while there were at least 100 people around, not doing a thing about it. Also, to be clear, we didn't provoke this man at all. He agreed to hit us for no reason, and that's creepy. Brandon called him a dick, but that was after he tried to run us over. We were good kids, trying to walk home, and we almost died/got seriously hurt because of it. Amused also, bust highway equals busy highway. I may have posted this before, but I don't remember. I was in high school, doing homework at the dining room table. From there, I could see the front door. Our front door at the time had a 2'X5-ish pane of glass in it, with a lace curtain over it. I remember hearing a noise, like somebody was on the porch. It was probably 9 p.m. or so, it was very dark outside and the porch light wasn't on. As I'm watching the front door, I can see the screen door opening. It stands open for a minute or so, and there's nobody there, or they were dressed all in black. I'm frozen, waiting to see what happens next. The screen door just slowly closes. If someone was there, they didn't just let it go, someone was closing it carefully so that it wouldn't make noise. After that, I don't remember if I heard footsteps. Maybe they saw me watching them and decided to quietly get out of there. Woke up. Clock says 3:34 a.m. I'm 17 and in my bedroom. It's pitch black but I hear some rattling downstairs. Terrified, I quietly tiptoe to my parents' room. Weird, it's empty. Where are my parents at 3:34 a.m.? Go upstairs to my brother's room. He's usually awake all night, but while the light is on, no one is in the room. So I guess whatever those noises are downstairs, it must be them. Why are they awake? Maybe someone died? I go downstairs. In the middle of my living room is what looks like two men stealing our TV. No one else is in sight. I run upstairs as quietly as possible, shut and lock my door. Suddenly there's banging on the door. I wake up. It was a dream and the relief washes over me. I look over at the clock. Weird coincidence, it's 3:34 a.m. I'm shaking, but decide to go downstairs to prove to myself that everything's fine. I go downstairs. The two men are in my kitchen, screaming at my parents and brother. I run upstairs to my bedroom and lock the door. 10 seconds later, I hear banging. I woke up. It's 3:34 a.m. this time. I had actually woken up and I don't manage to fall back asleep for about 36 hours. Edit. Lots of responses about lucid dreaming here. I spent most of my teens and early 20s as a lucid dreamer, discovering the techniques after a childhood plagued by very frightening sleep paralysis. I found a message board back in 1998 where I learned to at least have fun with it. The above story wasn't a sleep paralysis experience, but it was typical of the kinds of nightmares I used to have. Weirdly enough, I rarely have nested dreams anymore and haven't had a successful attempt at lucid dreaming in a few years. My guess is that it has something to do with hormones. I lived in a bizarre little house as a child. It was incredibly tall and thin, like an attached house except freestanding, with 3 floors, a basement and an attic. It was full of quirks, such as 2 fully functional fireplaces, a shower stall in the center of the basement, a backyard so small that you could not take 5 paces without hitting the fence, and an old-timey rope pull dumbwaiter that led from the kitchen to my bedroom. I loved that weird little place, but unfortunately it was incredibly old and half of its charm was the fact that it seemed to have been designed by an inarticulate conclave of lunatics, and eventually the repair costs exceeded what my parents were willing to sink into it, and we had to move. Preparing for the move was a chore. I packed most of my stuff myself, and I had taken to throwing stuff down the dumbwaiter and shoving all my clothes so thickly in my closet that they became a single, solid brick of fabric. While clearing that closet out, in fact, I came across a feature I hadn't noticed before, an attic entrance in the roof. Being an adventurous kid, I opened her up, stood on the closed brick, and began my first and last exploration into the topmost part of our weird little house. The first thing I noticed was that it wasn't as dark as it should have been. The place was strung with old, red Christmas lights which still burned with leftover incandescence, and a dozen little cracks and holes peeped down into all the bedrooms below. The second thing I noticed was that the place was set up for habitation. The insulation was plasticed away, there was an old gurney piled with sleeping bags and sheets, and a rusted mint green refrigerator which still worked when I tested it. The third thing was the bones. There were a lot of bones. I was a kid at the time, with a limited understanding of anatomy, but there were bones of all types heaped into a series of piles around the center of the attic. Small and large, clean and white, from every and any imaginable sort of creature, haphazardly stacked in a half-dozen osseous clumps. 2 of them were blackened, as if someone had tried to burn them, and the walls nearest those blackened piles were scrawled in dark bone char messages. Mostly they were just smears, but the word sorry appeared more than once. That room had been sitting over my head, for 8 years, while I slept. I always seem to get to these threads when my story will surely be buried, but here goes. When I was 13, my grandmother was dying of cancer and my mother and I stayed at her house and took care of her during her last few weeks. One night at 3 or so in the morning my mother ran into my room and told me that my grandmother, who was by this time completely bedridden, entered my mother's room, woke her up and then walked out of the room. There was no creepiness at the time, just a genuine concern for what my grandmother could possibly be doing up at 3 a.m. when she was literally days away from dying. We ran into her room, and sure enough she had passed away. Obviously, Given the shock of my grandmother dying, my mother and I didn't sit around chatting about how weird the whole experience was, but months or perhaps even years later I asked her about that night and she has no memory of telling me that my grandmother was up and walking around the house. She doesn't even remember what woke her up or why she woke me up. Gives me shivers just writing it. I posted this on another thread a few weeks ago. About a month ago I went over to my girlfriend's house. Except I felt really uneasy when I went into the living room. Turns out, they replaced a china cabinet with one of her grandmothers whom passed away a few months back. Her grandmother was bedridden in the hospital and I've ever gotten to meet her. I felt uneasy the whole time. Being around her grandmother's furniture made me so anxious and almost sad. When I told her, she said it was probably nothing. She went to the bathroom. When I went over to the cabinet, it was about 6 feet tall. Dark wood. It had 2 doors on the side and glass up front. And in the back was a mirror. I was looking at the teacups and small baby dolls when I could swear I saw someone in the mirror behind me. Just a silhouette. I called out to my girlfriend. But as I did, I heard a shrill screech from the bathroom. I start pounding on the door. And it opens. She was sitting on the floor, crying. She said she saw someone in the bathroom mirror. We booked it out of her house. No shoes. No jacket. Nothing, and right to my car. I drove for an hour or so. With no destination. When I returned her to her house, her mom was sitting on the doorstep. She said she kept seeing shadows move. Nope. I will go out of my way to make things like this happen. Someone claims their house is haunted. I want to see. Someone said they think they saw a skinwalker. My friends are looking. I've never found anything. But this was something else. Posted this before, but I'll do it again. I was on Manassas battlefield with my father when I was younger. We were sitting on the back of his tailgate eating McDonald's on top of a hill looking at some canyons. It was foggy and misty out that day with a slight chill, November I think. All of the sudden we see a man dressed in full Civil War attire waving at us standing by the canyons, about 50 to 100 meters away. My dad had a pair of binoculars with him and we got a closer look of the man. He appeared to be in a Confederate uniform and was standing stationary, only moving his arm to wave. It was a come here wave. My dad thought there was a reenactment going on and that the man needed help. So my dad walked down to the man while I watched with the binoculars. When my dad got close to the man, he stopped walking and had a confused posture. After a couple seconds next to the man, he turns around and sprints back to me. He proceeds to throw everything in the back of the truck and we leave the battlefield in a hurry. My dad said while walking down there, the man slowly disappeared, and my dad said he got the strangest feeling in his stomach and mad chills. To this day my dad gets the chills and goosebumps telling the story. My dad saw combat in Vietnam, so he is not an easy guy to scare. From my perspective, my dad was right next to the guy and never disappeared. We don't know what we saw, but I think it was a ghost. TLDR, I think we saw a ghost of a Confederate soldier. When I was a child, I lived in an old Victorian house, and I would always hear laughing while I was trying to sleep. I was an only child with a single mother, and when I was about 5 to 6, I would wake up hearing laughter in the hallway in the middle of the night. After mentioning this to my mom, she swore it was probably just the TV being left on late. One night, I awoke hearing the laughter in my room. I went to sit up but felt like there was someone holding my shoulders down, invisible hands gripping into my shoulders while I heard laughing. I screamed my little heart out. My mom ran into my room, flicking on the bedside lamp, convincing me it was just a dream, until I said that my shoulders hurt. She lifted up my t-shirt and there were 2 adult-sized handprints on my shoulders. I honestly thought I had imagined it and that it had never happened, but the other day I mentioned it in passing to my mom and she went blanket white and said I don't want to remember that. Thanks for listening to another episode of Reddit X. Subscribe and activate the notification bell so you won't miss any stories. Feel free to share your own stories below in the comments. Have a good day.